You too. Where on earth did the money I entrusted for Julia's dream disappear? It was my 18th birthday dinner. Those words, spoken by my grandmother Helen in the glittering upscale restaurant, ended everything I thought I knew and, strangely, marked the beginning of everything. Until a few minutes earlier, there had been a false calm. It was a perfect birthday party, put together by my father, George, and my mother, Mary. But when my grandmother, who had flown back from Europe as a surprise, casually asked me a question, the gears began to slip. So, tell me, how's your law study at university going? Has the $100,000 I gave been any help toward your dream? I almost dropped the fork I was holding and stared at her. $100,000? University? Studying law? What on earth was she talking about? My mind was filled with blank question marks. I looked toward my parents for help, confused. But they were not their usual confident selves. My father, George, kept swallowing as if he'd swallowed a stone, and my mother, Mary, had gone pale, her napkin crushed in her hand. The sight made my chest tighten with dread. University? I asked, tentatively. Then, as if to cut me off, my grandmother spoke in a slightly puzzled but gentle tone. What are you saying, Julia? You've told me since you were little that you wanted to become a lawyer to help people in trouble. That's why I entrusted your parents with the money to make your dream come true. You have received it, haven't you? Her words landed on my already confused mind like another blow. I had indeed told my grandmother my dream. She had remembered it. And she'd even offered financial help. And yet, my voice trembled as I forced the cruel truth out. But my parents, they told me, we don't have the money, so give up on university. Work for the family instead, so You're working? My grandmother repeated my words, incredulous. What do you mean? What happened to going to university? You should be on campus reading law books right now. You mean you're working part-time to pay for your tuition fees? If that's the case, why didn't your parents tell me anything? Each innocent question from her stabbed into my chest. No, Grandma, it wasn't a part-time job. I gave up university entirely and took a full-time job. I stand at the register at the supermarket every day. My mother tried to cut me off with a sharp, Julia. But before she could, a sound like the air itself being sliced rang out. It was the sound of my grandmother placing her wine glass on the table with force. The glass didn't break, but the wine trembled. What did you say? Her voice was very low and cold. The expression that had been gently stroking my cheek a moment before had vanished, replaced by a face I barely recognized, iced with anger. Her gaze was no longer on me. It pierced my trembling parents. The restaurant manager started to move over, but my grandmother raised one hand and stopped him. Absolute authority filled the room. You two... Her voice crawled across the floor and back up again. The money I entrusted only for Julia's future? Where did it go? That quiet question was more terrifying than any scream. It clamped down on my heart. My father kept dabbing sweat from his brow with a handkerchief, and my mother tried and failed to put on a smile, her lips trembling. There must have been some misunderstanding. My mother's voice was thin, but my grandmother wouldn't listen. She took her smartphone from her handbag and, with a decisive movement, began to make a call. A calm male voice came through the speaker. How may I assist you, ma'am? Howard, this is urgent. My grandmother's tone was businesslike and composed. Trace the flow of the $100,000 I gave George and Mary 2 years ago. Do it now. Find where every cent went. Bank records, credit card statements, everything. I want a report first thing tomorrow morning. Understood. I'll begin right away. The man on the other end, Howard, I assumed, was likely my grandmother's legal advisor. There was not a hint of surprise in his tone, as if he had anticipated this very situation. When the call ended, my mother burst out, her voice shrill with panic. How dare you? Are you accusing us of something? That money was for Julia. Silence, Mary. My grandmother's command cut her off instantly. I can no longer believe a single word that comes from your mouth. Julia. At last, my grandmother turned her gaze toward me. In her eyes burned not only anger, but a deep, aching sorrow. My poor girl, you've been working yourself to the bone for these people knowing nothing. They devoured your dream, your time, your future. Her words pierced straight through my heart. Yes, My future. My dream of studying law, of standing on my own 2 feet in the world. It was my parents, the people sitting right in front of me who made me abandon it, under the curse of those words, work for the family. I had believed them. I'd sealed my dream away and worked myself to exhaustion, thinking it was for something noble. And yet, all along, there was money for my education? How could they? A wave of fury and betrayal flooded my vision red. I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on us, whispering, judging. The humiliation only stoked my anger further. I was careless. My grandmother bit her lip in frustration. These last few years, since moving my work base to Europe, I never imagined they could do something so vile. That my own daughter and her husband would steal their child's future. With those words, the scattered puzzle pieces in my mind snapped into place, forming something horrifying. My grandmother had spent most of the past decade traveling the world as an international art dealer. Ever since I started high school, she'd rarely been in the States. She would call me sometimes asking, "Are you well?" Or, "How's school?" But she could never have guessed that my parents had quietly destroyed my path forward. And I hadn't reached out to her. Why? Because I'd been trapped in the cage of lies my parents had so carefully built. I could still remember the day I told them I wanted to study law back when graduation was near. University? Julia, what are you talking about? My mother looked at me, genuinely exasperated. Do you have any idea what kind of money that would take? Your father's company is struggling as it is. But there are scholarships. I tried to insist, but my father cut in heavily. What matters most is helping the family right now. That's the best way you can show gratitude. You're an adult now. You understand that, don't you? Then maybe I could talk to Grandma about it? That was my last, desperate hope. But my mother's face went pale. Absolutely not. You know how much your grandmother despises people who depend on others. If you bring up money, she'll disown you. I tried once, subtly, and she refused outright. Don't ever mention money around her again. And I believed those words. Grandma's strict and self-reliant. It sounded plausible. So, not wanting to worry her, I buried my dream deep inside and forced a smile. Okay, I'll give up on college and start working. I could still remember the relief on my parents' faces that day. Now, that same expression seemed nothing short of demonic. Looking back, there had been so many warning signs. My father often shut himself in his study, muttering, "The company's in trouble. We all need to pull together now. Julia, it helps so much that you're working." And I, foolishly loyal, believed every word. My mother, meanwhile, became obsessed with vague business investments. She'd say, "It's all for our future. Once it succeeds, we'll all live comfortably," while attending expensive seminars and chatting for hours with shady consultants. I thought she was just trying hard for the family's sake. Each time I handed them my entire paycheck, still in its envelope, they'd say the same thing. "Thank you, Julia. It's an investment for all of us. You'll reap the rewards one day, too." I never could have imagined that behind it all, my father was using my college fund to cover his company's losses, while my mother poured the rest into what was essentially a fraudulent investment scheme. And all the while, I told myself my work was noble, a sacrifice for our family's future. The $100,000 my grandmother had given them must have seemed like a miracle, a perfect opportunity. They'd weighed their daughter's future against their own pride and chosen the latter without hesitation. And now that I finally knew the truth, the cold air in the restaurant felt like needles against my skin. I couldn't taste anything anymore. Past and present memories swirled violently inside me, fusing into one raw, uncontainable rage. My hands trembled as I grabbed my water glass, drained it in one breath, and looked straight at my parents. I didn't want them to see me as some fragile girl who would break down and cry. "Why?" My voice, to my own surprise, came out cold and steady. "Why did you lie to me? I really believed you, that I shouldn't rely on Grandma. So I got up early every morning, worked at the supermarket all day, came home exhausted, and still told myself it was all for our family. And yet—" "Julia, please listen to me." My mother leaned forward, desperate. "You were never suited for academics. We did what we thought was best for you." For me? A hollow laugh escaped me. You stole my dream, my time, my future, and you call that for my sake? Which of your mouths dares to say that? My firm tone made my mother flinch and fall silent. It was my father, who had remained quiet until then, who finally spoke. He cleared his throat as if trying to recover a sense of authority and said in a heavy, deliberate tone, Julia, listen carefully. That money wasn't wasted. Think of it as an investment for the family. One day it will benefit your future too. Investment? Something inside me snapped at that word. An investment? Then tell me, what exactly did you invest in? I've heard that word hundreds of times. You said it every time I handed you my entire paycheck in an envelope. All the while, I never knew it was being poured into your pride and your failed ventures. My voice rang through the restaurant, slicing through the uneasy silence. Other diners turned to stare, but I no longer cared. Shame had long since been drowned by fury. Julia, stop it. You're making a scene. My mother's shrill voice cracked. Making a scene. Which one of us is really disgraceful here? I slammed my hands on the table and glared at them both. Feeding off your daughter's dream, trampling on Grandma's kindness, that's what's truly shameful. What you've done is beneath every human decency. My outburst left my father completely speechless, while my mother's lips trembled uncontrollably. Then, in a voice colder than glass, I spoke the words that ended it all. I no longer see you as my parents. The only family I have now is Grandma. I turned to my grandmother. Grandma, I'm sorry. Please help me. She rose quietly, drew me into her arms, and held me tight, gentle yet unwavering. Of course, my dear. That's exactly why I came. Then she looked at my parents, her tone sharp and absolute. George, Mary, I've heard enough of your excuses. Julia will come with me. She placed several bills neatly on the table. For tonight's dinner, consider it our last supper together. By tomorrow morning, you'll understand the gravity of what you've done. Prepare yourselves. Her words carried no anger, no pity, only final judgment. Turning her back on my stunned parents, my grandmother left the restaurant with a resolute air, holding me firmly by the shoulders. After leaving the restaurant, my grandmother took me to a black car that was waiting for us. As she draped her cashmere coat over me to ward off the cold, she gave the driver a single instruction. Take us home. Through the car window, I watched the restaurant lights shrink and fade into the distance. My grandmother's apartment sat atop a high-rise overlooking the city. First, take a warm shower. I've had new clothes prepared for you in the closet. While I showered, she brewed herbal tea in the kitchen. The gentle scent filled the air, easing the tightness in my chest little by little. When I returned to the living room wrapped in a soft bathrobe, she was waiting at the low table, several documents neatly spread before her. Now then, Julia. She sat across from me and looked me straight in the eyes. Tell me everything. What kind of life have you been living? What exactly have those two made you do? Leave nothing out. I began speaking as if a dam had burst. The grueling hours at the supermarket, how I'd scrimped on my own study materials for law, using the money instead to cover our household groceries. That night, I'd quietly closed my phone whenever I saw the dazzling Instagram posts from friends at university. More than anything, I thought about how many times I'd suppressed myself with the words, for the family. As I spoke, my grandmother never once interrupted. She simply listened, holding my words in those deep eyes of hers. The expressions that flashed across her face from time to time were a mixture of profound sorrow and a resolve as hard as steel. By the time I finished telling everything, the eastern sky was paling into dawn. She handed me another warm cup of herbal tea she'd made and spoke quietly. You've suffered so much. You endured it all on your own, didn't you? But it's over now. From here on, I'm with you. Those words warmed me more than anything else. That night, I slept, for the first time in a long while, deeply and safely in my grandmother's guest room. The next morning, I woke to find her already at the large desk in the living room, wearing a stern expression as she conducted a video conference with several people. The middle-aged man in a suit was surely Howard, her lawyer. He was pointing to documents on the screen as he gave his report. When my grandmother noticed me, she beckoned me over. Julia, come sit. There are things you need to know. I sat beside her. Howard greeted me respectfully and shared a document on the screen that looked like a bank transaction statement. The investigation results are in. I'll be blunt. Howard's voice filled the quiet living room. The $100,000 you entrusted was almost entirely withdrawn and spent. As for the breakdown, he clicked through files and revealed shocking facts one after another. First, $45,000 went toward the purchase of a luxury sedan. The title is in George's name. A photo of my father beaming next to a brand new car appeared on the screen. The same father who used to sit in his study with a worried face, lamenting how the company was struggling, had come home one day in a shiny new car. When I asked, "What's this about?" he proudly told me, "It's company expense, some tax-saving measure. Don't worry, we didn't use personal funds." Not knowing anything about business, I had to accept it at face value. Next, $32,000 went toward home renovations, mainly a kitchen remodel and an expanded walk-in closet for Mary. During the renovation, my mother had said, "My business is doing a little better, so the bank gave me a special loan. This is all part of an investment in the future. A beautiful home will bring better luck, don't you think?" My fingertips grew cold as I listened. While I was scrubbing the hard floors at the supermarket, they were turning my dream into cars and closets. "And the remaining $23,000, Howard continued, pausing slightly and looking at me with sympathy, was invested entirely in a venture your mother described as a business investment. Our investigation shows that this venture is essentially a shell company with no real operations, highly likely a fraudulent scheme. In short, that money has vanished like foam." It was my grandmother, who had been listening quietly, who took up Howard's words. Her voice was beyond anger. It was ice cold. My mother had always boasted that she had an eye for investments, that one day she'd build a big business. She even forced part of my wages into that so-called business, saying, "It'll benefit you too." All of it was a scam. Not only had they stolen my education, my sweat and tears were erased by my mother's vanity and foolishness. That final truth pulled my last reserves of pity away. I no longer had any lingering feelings for them. I raised my head and looked straight at Howard on the screen and at my grandmother beside me. "Howard, Grandma." My voice felt firmer than I expected, full of resolve. "I will not forgive them. I will press criminal charges against them. I want them prosecuted for stealing my future. Please help me." Hearing my words filled with resolve, Howard nodded on the screen, and my grandmother pulled me into a strong, reassuring embrace. "Of course, Julia. We will be your sword and your shield. Howard, prepare the documents right away, but do not put them into action yet. We mustn't let them catch on." Her words made me hesitate a little. "But Grandma, can't we confront them right now?" "Do not rush, Julia." She cut me off, meeting my question with eyes that seemed to see several moves ahead. "A cornered rat will do anything. We must not underestimate what they might attempt. While they still believe they can control you and talk their way out of this, we'll quietly seal every exit. We'll gather every piece of evidence, locate their hidden assets, and only when every escape road is closed, we strike the checkmate." Just as my grandmother said, we began to move quietly but swiftly, undetected by them. While Howard's law firm gathered tangible proof tracing the flow of money, I was given an important role of my own: to monitor my parents' movements. Of course, I couldn't meet them in person, so my grandmother hired a skilled private investigator, an old acquaintance of hers, to handle the direct surveillance. But I wasn't content to simply wait for reports. In fact, my mind was burning with an almost unnerving calm. I knew them, how they thought, how they acted, better than anyone. I was no longer their obedient daughter. I had become an observer, an analyst, a player in the game. First, I checked the settings on my phone. As I suspected, there was a location-sharing app secretly installed, one that allowed my parents to track me without my knowledge. That's how they knew exactly that I was staying at my grandmother's apartment. I decided to use that against them. Instead of turning it off, I left it on, so they'd believe I was still right where they expected me to be. Next, I opened my laptop and entered the password for a shared cloud service that my father used. He'd always hated complicated passwords. After a few predictable guesses, I got in, and when I saw what was inside, I froze. His search history contained chilling phrases: countries with weak U.S. extradition treaties, how to hide assets in Mexico. They were planning to flee the country. It was clear why they'd chosen Mexico. It offered easier escape from legal pursuit. Even more damning, there were emails exchanged with a real estate agent in Cancun. But what truly made my blood run cold was an email from my mother to a friend. Cancun is warm all year, and living costs are low. It's far more comfortable than the US. And I'm planning to take Julia with us. If she's with us, my mother won't dare to act rashly. That girl is our last insurance policy. She had planned to use me as leverage, not out of love, but as a bargaining chip against my grandmother. Though anger surged within me, I calmly took screenshots of every single screen. This was conclusive proof. They were beyond redemption. Criminals with no room left for negotiation. I immediately sent all the data to the investigator and to Howard, then turned to Grandma. Grandma, we don't need to wait any longer. We have to act before they do. The information I sent became the signal flare. My grandmother reviewed the evidence with cold precision and then gave Howard her final order. Checkmate. Show no mercy. That very afternoon, Howard filed an emergency motion for asset preservation with the court. Every bank account, property, and security in my parents' names was frozen. The money they'd spent on the new car, the home renovations, and even the funds they prepared for their Cancun escape, none of it could be moved. Not a single dollar. At the same time, based on the intelligence I'd gathered, the police quietly took action. Plainclothes officers surrounded their home without alerting them. If they tried to leave the house, especially if they tried to take me as their insurance, they would be arrested on the spot. That night, I waited tensely in the living room of my grandmother's apartment. The hours dragged by until, near midnight, the phone rang. It was the investigator. They've moved. With those two words, the air in the room tightened. He reported that my parents were loading several suitcases into their car, preparing to leave. They must have discovered their accounts were frozen and decided to flee with whatever cash remained, taking me, no doubt, as leverage. But the moment their car rolled out of the driveway, several unmarked police cars emerged from the darkness, red and blue lights flashing, blocking their path completely. Apparently, my parents, perhaps realizing they had no way out, got out of the car, and only then understood that they were completely surrounded. I heard that my father stood there in stunned disbelief, while my mother collapsed to the ground, crying. Imagining that scene, I slowly closed my eyes. When the trial began, Howard presented every piece of evidence I had uncovered, systematically proving my parents' calculated, malicious crimes. The people sitting in the defendant's seats were nothing like the proud, authoritative parents I once knew. They looked broken, exhausted, stripped of all dignity. They tried to justify themselves to the end, claiming, "We did it for our daughter," or "It was a moment of weakness." But in the face of the damning evidence, the Cancun escape plan, the email about taking me as a hostage, those excuses rang hollow. A few weeks later, the verdict was delivered. Fraud, embezzlement, and abandonment of parental duty toward a minor. Both of my parents were found guilty on multiple charges and sentenced to prison. The time they would spend behind bars was far shorter than the years they had stolen from my future. But still, it was proof that justice had recognized my truth. From that day forward, my world turned completely upside down. First, through Howard, my grandmother secured all the recovered funds and set aside enough to fully cover my university tuition. But that wasn't all. "This is what you should have received all along, and what you'll need from now on." With those words, she opened a separate account in my name, containing $50,000 for my living expenses. When I saw the number printed in that bank book, I finally understood the true meaning of money. It wasn't paper meant to buy luxury cars or designer clothes. It was the means to learn without fear, to build a future with my own hands. While living in my grandmother's apartment, I threw myself into studying harder than ever before. And when the university acceptance letter finally arrived, when I saw that single word, "Congratulations," I ran to her and cried like a child in her arms. Though I was a little later than my peers, I had finally taken my first step toward my dream. I later heard that, after serving their sentences, my father and mother now live quietly in a shabby apartment on the outskirts of town. He works as a janitor while she does part-time jobs, scraping by day to day. Considering what they had done to me, it felt like nothing more than the natural consequence of their own choices. I had no pity left for them, not even a drop. They had chosen their path. They would live with its weight. I know I will never see them again. They no longer exist as characters in the story of my life. Years passed since then. I graduated at the top of my class from the university's law faculty, passed the notoriously difficult bar exam on my first attempt, and today I run my own law firm in the heart of downtown, its sign proudly bearing my name. This office isn't a gift from my grandmother. It's the fortress I built with my own strength. My parents have never reached out. I don't know how they live now, and I have no desire to know. At 18, I thought I had lost everything, but I was wrong. A stolen future can be reclaimed, multiplied by your own hands. And now I'm living proof of that truth.